Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Over the years, God had appeared to the people of Israel in a variety of forms. He spoke to Moses out of a burning bush. He had led the Israelites through the wilderness by making himself visible as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When God had descended upon Mount Sinai to give the law to Moses, he had made his presence known both visibly and audibly through the means of thunder, lightning, fire, and smoke. And the people had been so impressed by this tangible show of force that they had refused to approach the mountain out of fear. Now in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 17 through 26, Moses tries to encourage a new generation of Israelites to remember the Lord their God. As they prepared to enter the Promised Land, it was going to be essential that they not forget God. He may be invisible, but he was going ahead of them and would turn back their enemies before them, as long as they remained faithful to him. If you say in your heart, "These nations are greater than I, how can I dispossess them?" You shall not be afraid of them, but you shall remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all Egypt, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs, the wonders, the mighty hand, and the outstretched arm by which the Lord your God brought you out. So will the Lord your God do to all the peoples of whom you are afraid. Moreover, the Lord your God will send hornets among them, until those who are left and hide themselves from you are destroyed. You shall not be in dread of them, for the Lord your God is in your midst, a great and awesome God. The Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. You may not make an end of them at once, lest the wild beasts grow too numerous for you. But the Lord your God will give them over to you and throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. And he will give their kings into your hand, and you shall make their name perish from under heaven. No one shall be able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. The carved images of their gods you shall burn with fire. You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, or take it for yourselves, lest you be ensnared by it, for it is an abomination to the Lord your God. And you shall not bring an abominable thing into your house and become devoted to destruction like it. You shall utterly detest and abhor it, for it is devoted to destruction. Deuteronomy 7, verses 17 through 26. 8 times in 10 verses, Moses uses the phrase, "the Lord your God," when referring to Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. In Hebrew, it is Jehovah Elohim. Moses' repetitive use of this particular name for God is intended to provide weight to what he has to say to the Israelites. He's well aware that the people are fearful as they prepare to enter the land of Canaan. Moses has been here before and most likely still has painful memories associated with the day 40 years earlier when the Israelites let their fear get the best of them and had refused to enter the land. So in his attempt to motivate the next generation, he goes out of his way to emphasize the presence and power of God. In fact, his use of the name Elohim was intentional because it conveyed the infinite, all-powerful nature of God. Elohim is the name used in Genesis 1, verse 1, to describe God's creation of the world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God's invisible power was put on display through his creation of the world. The very existence of the universe with the planets and stars, along with the earth and all it contains, were evidence of God's power. And the Apostle Paul reminds us that God's power remains on display for all mankind to see. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. Romans 1, verses 19 through 20. God chose to make his power known. And Moses encouraged the Israelites to remember how their invisible, all-powerful God had revealed himself to them in the past. God's power, while invisible to the naked eye, was far from unknowable or imperceptible. They had been given ample proof of God's power. Just remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and to all the land of Egypt. Remember the great terrors the Lord your God sent against them. You saw it all with your own eyes, and remember the miraculous signs and wonders, and the strong hand and powerful arm with which he brought you out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 7, verses 18 through 19. And Moses assured them that God would use that very same power to assist them in their conquering of the Canaanites. They would not be entering the land alone. They would have Jehovah Elohim on their side, so their fear was unfounded. The Lord your God will use this same power against all the people you fear. Deuteronomy 7, verse 19. They were going to have to face their fears with faith in their all-powerful God. Yes, their enemies were real. They could see them with their eyes. But their God, while invisible, had proven his existence through miraculous signs and wonders, and he would do so again. But they were going to have to trust him. Moses assured the Israelites that God was in their midst. They may not be able to see him, but he was there, and they could trust him. Moses described God as great and awesome. He is Gadol, great in magnitude and extent. There is no one or nothing like God. He is supreme and without equal. He is Yareh, a fear-producing, awe-inspiring God who deserves all honor and glory. This great God was going to go before the people of Israel and assure their victory over the land's inhabitants. And while God was fully capable of eliminating each and every Canaanite from the land in one mighty act, Moses revealed that God's plan was going to entail a slow and methodical transfer of ownership. No doubt the Israelites would have preferred that God give them the land in one major victory, but that was not God's way. God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that the instantaneous elimination of all the land's inhabitants would have left the cities and villages unoccupied and the fields and vineyards uncultivated. If all the Canaanites were to suddenly disappear, the land would suffer. There were not yet enough Israelites to occupy and care for the countless towns and villages that dotted the landscape. So God's plan would involve a more strategic and systematic approach. But Moses knew this was going to pose a potential problem for the people of Israel. It ensured that there would be a constant presence of their enemies in the land. And as long as there were Canaanites in the land, there would be false gods that could tempt the people of Israel to turn away from God. Which is why Moses warned them, "You must burn their idols in fire, and you must not covet the silver or gold that covers them. You must not take it, or it will become a trap to you, for it is detestable to the Lord your God. Do not bring any detestable objects into your home, for then you will be destroyed just like them. You must utterly detest such things, for they are set apart for destruction." Deuteronomy 7, verses 25 through 26. Unfaithfulness was going to be a constant temptation for the people of God. Even as God gave them victories over their enemies, proving himself to be the Lord your God, they would find themselves tempted to disobey him. And Moses knew that the countless idols of their enemies, made of gold and silver, would prove a stumbling block to the people of Israel. They would covet them for their financial value. But Moses warned them to have nothing to do with these false gods. They were an abomination to Yahweh. They represented man's worship of something other than God. So they were to loathe these idols just as much as God did, and they were to destroy them, eliminating any risk that these pseudo-deities might lure them into unfaithfulness. It's interesting how Moses juxtaposes the Lord your God with the false gods of the Canaanites. Jehovah Elohim was invisible yet all-powerful. The false gods of the Canaanites were visible and tangible, yet lacking in any power because they were actually non-existent. But these false and lifeless gods still had the power to lure the people of Israel into committing acts of unfaithfulness. Even the precious metals from which they were made possessed the power to lure the people of God into taking their eyes off of Him as their sole source of provision and power. God was going to be in their midst. He was going to go before them, preparing the way and providing them with incremental victories over their enemies. But they would have to follow his lead and see the Canaanites, their false gods, and their inherent wickedness as a people as constant threats to their own spiritual well-being as a nation.